What I want to talk about today is something we call Soma Design. It's a particular way of doing design work, and I'm going to talk about first a little bit about why we do it this way, and anchor it a little bit theoretically before I show you some of the stuff that has been built, and then the secret sauce, namely how we do it, so that you can do it if you want to. I should say first that I was doing a lot of work designing technologies to be worn on the body or nearby the body before entering into this Soma Design world. And I was very unsatisfied with doing that. And so, as you know, a long time ago, we did all of this work on measuring stuff with sensors around your wrist and so on, and then mirroring back these numbers to users, and then we're supposed to immediately trim our bodies, become perfect and healthy and optimal in every way. And of course we didn't. So I step on the scales every morning. Do I lose weight because of that? No, I don't. So, and also the whole idea that a body is there to be trimmed and kept in perfection is a horrible ideal to be designing for, isn't it? So I was super unsatisfied with the work that we were doing, even though, you know, the systems we built were beautiful and users loved them and whatnot. Still, why are we doing this shit? Why are we putting technology onto people's bodies? It becomes very close to us and who we are when we do that. So I was searching for ways of engaging with that technology that would allow me to design for a better life. And then first you have to decide what is a good life then. What is a good life to you guys? What is a good life to me? So it took me into aesthetics. So any designer, of course, needs to take a position on aesthetics. And so this is where I'm going to come to today. To aesthetics and how to think about aesthetics and why we're designing what we are. But I'll start with giving you a little bit of theoretical foundation, because of course when you're designing with or for or around the body, you need to figure out what you mean by body first, maybe. And there are a lot of stuff that goes back all the way to the Greek mythology and philosophers that divide up mind and body, for example, or also associating that with male-female dichotomies or rational-emotional dichotomies and so on. And so, as you know, mind and rational thinking is associated with the male, and body is associated with female and emotional and whatnot, and one has obviously higher status than the other one. But when you look into the world and what the world really is, those dichotomies do not really exist, do they? I'm not saying that mind is the same as body, but that they are highly interconnected. You can't really talk about your ways of thinking without knowing that your nervous system is spread throughout your whole body, right? Your emotions, your thinking, your way of moving, all of that is connected. And the way you are in the world with other people is also connected to this. So that whole idea that you can separate mind from body is just not true, is it? It's a crap idea. Also, maybe today I don't have to argue as to why male and female is also a stupid way of categorizing people. Without denying that there are differences in bodily constitutions, we still are, you know, there's a whole spectrum of stuff in between and a whole lot of norms that work on these things that can allow me to be fairly male or fairly female or whatever I want to associate with those poles and so on. So I just want to tell you a little story about how tightly connected I think these things are. So I was traveling with my colleague from UC Santa Cruz, and her last name is interesting. It comes from her relatives that lived on the Orkney Islands. And so she wanted me to travel with her to the Orkney Islands to figure out her heritage, where she came from. And so we did, and we came to this tomb that was called the tomb. And we're like, oh, the graves of your relatives. Yeah-ho, let's go and have a look. As it turned out, that tomb was 5,000 years old, so I'm not so sure it was her relatives. It might have been, but maybe not. But what was interesting there is that they had a bunch of tools that they had found in this tomb. It was sealed 5,000 years ago for some reason that nobody knows why. And so a lot of stuff was still there. One of the tools is this one, and that's my hand holding it. We're allowed to touch stuff. And it might look like a stone, basically, and it is, but somebody's chipped a mark there. You can see the mark, and your thumb fits perfectly with that mark. And when you put your thumb there and hold on to the stone, you can really feel like, yeah, I get a really good grip now. I could use this to do work. Imagine doing design that would make sense to somebody 5,000 years from now when they dig up your stuff out of some grave, right? That would be cool. Any which way, they had also found a lot of skeletons in there. And what you could see from the skeletons is that these were, strong. Both men and women, super strong, lots of muscles. And of course, if you have a tool that is basically a stone, then you have to be strong. You guys are maybe not so buff. Can I say that? Not to offend anyone, but it seems like your tools might be training a few muscles in your body and a lot of visual and verbal. Oh, they're strong. They're strong, yeah. Mountain climbing and whatnot you could do. Yeah, easy. So anyway, you see this super strong, of course, relationship between the tools we provide people with and the body and what you can do with your body. So the muscle system, but also, of course, the nervous system and the way you work with movements. Like probably to use this stone to do something sensible, you have to work with learning how to do that. It might take a long time to learn that. And it's also, of course, connected to your culture. Once you have a stone to do stuff with, then you can have bread, you can do all sorts of, prepare skins and all of that stuff. So suddenly your culture, what you can think about, what you can do, how you can feed your family and whatnot is all connected, right? And it's inseparable. You can't look at this culture and understand those skeletons without also seeing the tools and vice versa. So we are shaped by the tools we use, not only through the mind, but the whole body and the whole nervous system and emotions and the way we socialize. And so, as a designer, what you need to do is to make sure that whatever you're building into your system, the invitation you're extending to your end users, is going to make sense. Because that is what will shape them, not only what they can do in that mind way, but also what they can, how their whole bodies are going to be shaped, and the interactions with others, and obviously culture. So those are inseparable. That was just my point. I guess it's obvious, right, that these are inseparable. So this is why we want to engage in non-dualistic design. I also think that movement is foundational and corporeal, and not really first and foremost symbolic and language driven. So first, when you have a baby, I don't know if you've had any babies, but the babies are lovely, and they can interact with you, and they can make meaning out of the world and out of their interactions with you guys without language, right? So meaning making is not dependent on verbalization and language necessarily. Then, of course, after a while, they do, language is part of the human morphology, so we all do learn language, and it's a wonderful innovation, but intelligence starts in movement. And I built this partly on Sheets Johnston, I think is absolutely fabulous. She was a biologist and philosopher and dancer, and this is her doing some dance. And her position is just that movement is primary and language is secondary. It's a consequence of having a body, a human body. And that intelligence is enacted in action, in and through movement of the whole self. And we came back from a conference in Santa Cruz where was saying, and we're all like, no, that intelligence is corporeal. And, she's also got a biology background and so on. So, but as I said, biology and the human morphology and our genetics and so on is of course shaped by the culture we're in. And so our bodies are in a way completed by culture. And that is of course the norms out in society, but it also depends on what kind of particular body you have. So if you're born into the body with a female body, then that menstruates and so on, then certain norms and ideas are going to be projected onto you, and you will be shaped by that, right? So, and then we can work with that, and we can change and so on. But there's an interesting dynamic there where we change, and obviously, it's pointing out the obvious. I'm a horseback rider. You learn how to horseback ride. Right? It changes your muscular system, your nervous system reactions, and also it changes the horse. And so you get into this kind of interaction. So of course we change through life with what we do in a bodily sense. But the aesthetics then. So if this is the starting point, that we should be engaging with people's flesh and blood and nervous systems and whatnot, why should we be doing that? What is the direction of design that we should be engaging with? What is it, this good life? And interaction design, or any designer, needs to have a grip on the aesthetics, right? And what do we mean by aesthetics? I'm not talking about beauty. I'm talking about a skill that you can acquire. And I'm basing this on Richard Schusterman. And here he is. He's a philosopher wearing his golden suit, one of his performances that he does. He's a pragmatist philosopher, American pragmatism. Yeah. So he talks, first of all, he talks about Soma, as I said, as this interconnected, living, purposive, sentient, perceptive body or bodily subjectivity. That is, you can't separate body from mind, you can't separate emotion from thinking, you can't separate the social setting from how we act in the world. Anyway, so that's first. So Soma is a way of trying not to say mind and body. It's just using another word, basically. Some people talk about embodiment, but there's never any way to be disembodied, so I don't like that word. So I used Soma instead. Aesthetics, then, to him, is a way of attending to the world through all your senses, deliberately, to reap more pleasure and interest from the world. So we're soon going to have lunch, and and one way you could eat your lunch is shuffle, 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 and then you have all the nutrition and it's done. Or you could actually enjoy it. You could slowly smell it, touch it, use your fork in a new way perhaps, feel the weight of the food on the fork and how it approaches your mouth, what it feels like when you're chewing. Maybe you could try chewing first on the other side. We're very habitual, so we always put the food in one side first. What if you try the other side today? What happens if you chew in a different manner and then swallow in a different manner? What if you attend to how it fills your body and so on? That could let you reap more aesthetic pleasure from that meal. Okay, maybe you can't do this all the time, attend to stuff in this manner all the time, but when you do, you can expand on your universe and you could have novel experiences and richer experiences potentially. So skill, aesthetics as a skill, an awakening from the mindless, joyless, everyday behaviors that we have when we just shuffle in lunch. And to him, this is the highest art of all, that of living better lives. Now, religiously, we might have people with a different opinion about what life is about in the room. I don't know. Maybe some of you live more in the idea that the afterlife, that's where the pleasures are. I follow, and like Plato talking about the ideal world and how that is, that this life is just mere shadows of that afterlife. I'm more like, Aristotle sort of saying, no, this is the life I have. This is the body I have. It's now a 60-year-old granny body. It can do certain things, not other things. It's going through menopause, and it's dealing with becoming a new kind of butterfly in the world. And I can work with that. I can have more experiences with that. Yeah? And if I do, that's my life.
Let's get a clarification.
Yeah.
About somaesthetics. So Is the pushback on the notion of like pure aesthetics, which is sort of like disembodied, is the idea that some aesthetics is trying to reunify the notion of aesthetics with body?
Yeah, two things. So sometimes when we say aesthetics, we're talking about the object and whether the object has a perfect shape or looks beautiful or whatever. This is not about that. This is about what is going on right in between me and the world. So usually when we were quite fixated on visual aesthetics, but he's just pulling the attention to the fact that aesthetics can be through your whole body, right? You can be touched, you can, and he's also pulling our attention to that this is not solely the pleasurable. So, we do enjoy going on a merry-go-round, or we enjoy rugby, colliding into other people and stuff like that. So not only attending to your senses as a way of being nice and pleasurable, that's all lovely, but all sorts of experiences. So, and then he's super proud of the fact that the A is reused. So you put Soma together with aesthetic.
Yeah, got it.
So it's a theory of aesthetics in the pragmatist tradition. So anyway, enough with the theory. Because if you're a designer, what you need to do is, of course, translate this into what can I do with digital technologies or autonomous systems or robotic materials or whatever to shape this into some kind of interaction. And so what is interesting to me is that he more or less promises that if you work with your attention towards what the world offers, you can have richer experiences. So there is a somaesthetic promise that you can transform, you can change, which is very hopeful, isn't it? I don't know what you feel, but to me it's like, yes, I want to change. I want to have more experiences in my life, and I love the idea that I can still change. But how do we translate that into design? So that is what I've done. So I haven't done all of that theory. I pull on that theory to try and figure out how can we do that so that, for example, designers can train their own somas, their own mind bodies, to create better design through attending through all our senses, increasing our sensibilities. And today I have with me from Gothenburg. She's written a lovely paper. If you want to know how to train your sensibilities a bit more, she's been looking at how to be more sensitive to shadows. Because shadows we have everywhere, and they can be poetic and interesting or scary or whatnot. And so she wrote a lovely paper about that. So increasing our sensibilities, how do we do that? So that we can design with shadows or with our bodies or whatnot. But also, can we build systems that help our end users to change in the way they want to change, which might not be what we want for them. So we built a bunch of systems. This is a long time ago, and we were working with IKEA. You know IKEA is a Swedish company. Yeah. And when you work with IKEA, what you want to do, obviously, is interactive furniture, right? That's what you want to do. You want to be in the showroom of IKEA at some point. So that's what we did. This was a long time ago, 2013, 14, something. And they wanted to work with health and make sure that their products were sort of promoting a good life at home. So we did a bunch of different things. Two of them we took all the way to proper implementation. One is this breathing light. What it does is very, very simple technology. There's you lay down on the floor, closing your eyes, and there's a sensor above you that you can see here, and it's just measuring the distance between your chest and the lamp. So as you're breathing in and out, you get closer to the lamp and further away from the lamp, and the lamp will then be dimming in the same tempo as you're breathing. So it is not trying to make you breathe in a different pattern. We could have done that, but we didn't. It's just following your breathing. So it's just dimming in the same tempo as you're breathing. When you're laying underneath, here you have who I lost to Spotify. Me, anyway. Laying under the lamp, and she's breathing, and the lamp is dimming in the same tempo. Underneath that, we put this mat, and the mat is, heating up underneath different body parts. And what we're exploring there is your experience of warmth or cold towards your skin. So it's haptic experiences. Trying to deepen your understanding and your body awareness of your whole body, but also in particular temperature. So, so it starts with verbal instructions, but then the verbal instruction goes away. Yeah, you get the point. Yes. Any which way. So we put this then into people's households. We produced 4 of these systems. So only 4 households, but they had it for a very long time, which is what you want to do if you want to see transformational effects, right? And so after 3 months, we came back to, we interviewed them several times. We also interviewed them a whole year after the whole study was ended. And I've never had such strong reactions from end users as we had in that study. There was one who cried when we said we have to take the system back. We had somebody who was a friend of one of the households. He was going to be thrown out of Sweden because of migration rules, and he couldn't sleep. But as soon as he lay down on the mat, he fell asleep. We had a 13-year-old who said, yeah, she was really shy, but she said, yeah, you know, when I give talks at school and I'm really nervous, I just return to the breathing and then I calm myself down, and so on. And a lot of other strong transformational effects. Now, you might say, well, how do you know that it was actually the mat and the lamp and not something else in their life that was changing, right? So this is why we collected really rich data, more auto narratives of people, of their whole lives, what was going on with jobs, with partners, with everything, right? And that is where we do our interpretation. And that is where we should be doing our interpretation, is what I think. Life is complex, and it should be. And you can read more about that study in an award-winning Kai paper, if you want to. Now, okay, so you might say, well, yeah, lovely. You did some lovely design ones, and they were fairly simple. How do you know that Soma Design works for anything else? So this is where I work according to Johan Redström. You would probably say Redström, right? Johan Redström wrote this book called Making Design Theory. So his idea is that design research, what we are doing, as you already said, Michael, is that you start from certain worldviews. In this case, I start from somaesthetics. I start from the idea that we should not work with dichotomies and so on. And then you start doing design experiments to see how big is this bucket? How many designs can I do within this bucket? And when does the bucket start to fall over? So I need new scaffolding, new theories, new ways of understanding the world as a way of explaining what is going on in my design program. So this is what we're doing. We're building one system after another. And the user studies of those systems are lovely, but that's not the key. The key is the actual design work, as you said. So gaining knowledge through design. So we built, for example, a guitar. So this was... He said, I get so nervous when I'm playing the guitar. He's a brilliant folk music player. But anyway, I get nervous. And we're like, yeah, can you play something really difficult for us? And we were engaging with that. And you could see that he held his breath when he got nervous. So we created this shape-changing element on the guitar that would sense when you're not breathing anymore and then push you gently to get you back into breathing as an example of transforming your performance. This is Joe LaDelfa standing behind me. He's been working with Floyd Miller and others in Australia doing drones that you can dance with. This one is inspired by Tai Chi. So if you look at my hips, I'm moving a little bit like you do in Tai Chi. And so here it's engagement with drone technology as a way of gaining more aesthetic appreciation of moving together with autonomous systems. Together with Özgun and some MIT Media Lab, Hiroshi Ishii and others, we've created interactive materials that you can weave into fabric and put on the body. So we created, for example, a form of a corset where when those tubings are inflated, they can contract or expand. So it's basically McGibbon's muscles, but smaller and enacted with pneumatics. And the idea here was that we had an opera singer working in the lab, Kelsey Cotton, and she wanted to communicate to the audience what it feels like to sing. So when an opera singer sings, there's a lot of muscles involved. She made us experience that, and for example, she said there's a muscle here that is involved, and we're like, what? So of course the whole apparatus. Anyway, she wanted the audience to feel a little bit like a reminiscent of what it feels like to sing. And so as she's singing in real time, we use AI to translate her singing into shape-shifting elements on the body. So we feel her body on top of ours. That's creepy, isn't it? Actually, it does not feel like being a singer, because when she's singing from inside out, right? And when we feel these enactments on top of our bodies, it's from the outside in. So the feeling was more of, I don't know what it was. I don't know how to describe this. It was like, you know, that drummer in Metallica, when he's drumming on your ribs, or at other times it felt like something dying on my body, or, you know, it was, yeah. How to describe that experience was really interesting. And again, expanding on the universe of experiences that I can have.
But with singing, actually, it's like vocal music instructors will sometimes like help you touching. Yeah, they'll sort of like get you to lean in on the diaphragm. So it's not unreasonable that this kind of thing would help to produce the sort of familiar, the feeling that you're supposed to feel on the outside. And there's a disjunction between I'm supposed to be feeling this and I don't. Yeah. Then you know you're not supporting your breath properly.
For sure. So there are instrumental things you can do. All sounds lovely. But I'm more interested in expanding the aesthetic experience. Okay. If you see what I mean. You know, I really want this to be not, oh yeah, now I can feel what muscles are activated, but rather having a novel experience of a music performance that takes me beyond what is already super interesting in the music performance into something that is even richer.
So then let me just ask, this could be an alien feeling of what it's like to have these muscles engaged. That could be an aesthetic experience of like, oh, I now better understand, like, you know, what it's like to be a bat, so to speak.
So right behind you, we wrote a paper together with on monster experiences. So they're part human, part cyborg.
Part opera singer? Are you suggesting the opera singer?
No. The technology feels like technology, but with a human component. So they become like centaurs or Frankenstein monster or, you know, all of these monsters we have in the humanities. And those are not, they're not negative experiences nor positive. They're right in between and they're super interesting. So, yes, we can do instrumental stuff, and that is the first thing that people say. Yeah, you could train yourself and then you can become a better singer. Yep. But you could also look at this as an aesthetic experience.
And you're saying it fell short for you?
No, it didn't.
The outside in was an aesthetic experience.
No, it was. It was an amazing experience. It created a completely different way of understanding the work. So the work, I don't know if you heard it, but it's modern opera. So she's singing these movements over and over with two recorded voices of herself. So the piece is really about a man who wanted to have a last conversation with two of his friends who had passed away. So they have arguments and they're talking. This is the Metallica drummer person, you know. So they have arguments, they have lovely conversations and so on. And towards the end of the piece, the friends die. And I could feel that in the corset on my body. I started crying. You know, I often cry at work, but there you go. We've also done stuff that then might resonate more with your feeling of, there needs to be an instrumental aim, maybe. So there's work by Anna Ståhl and Madeleine Beilam on something they call the pelvic chair, helping you to train your pelvic floor muscle, become more aware of your pelvic floor muscle. So you're all aware of your pelvic floor muscle? Go for it! Tense it. Release it. Tense it at 12 o'clock. Tense it at 9 o'clock. Okay, so, yeah, were you able to do it? Okay, for the guys in the room, you'll have better sex if you learn to control your pelvic floor muscle. For the women in the room, once you give birth, bloody hell, you have to work with your pelvic floor muscle and you have to be aware of it. And if you're not aware of it, where it is today, then I strongly suggest that you try to start figuring it out, because this is an important muscle. It carries, or a set of muscles that together carry the whole internal intestines, right? And when it becomes loose, yeah, you don't want that. You want it to be tight, but also you want to use the whole thing. So when we go through our teenage years, we want to look good. And so we pull everything in, right? Slim. And that means that we keep it tensed all the time, 70% or so. So learning how to untense it is really important as well, because then you have the full range of this muscular system. So here you're sitting on this chair. It inflates in the back. It inflates between your legs so that you sit in the right position with your pelvis. It then releases air so that you have a sense of relaxing, which usually helps people to relax the pelvic floor muscle. It then starts poking you right where the muscle is. Okay, so you have to avoid, right, certain parts there, and poke only in between the skeleton parts so that you touch the actual muscular system. So this is what it's doing here. It's shape-changing soft robotics materials. And so they've just completed a study of this, and it seemed to have really good effects. It's very intimate, and here we're exploring intimate touch and the problems with being touched by robotic materials. And it had, the women that they had in the study said it really worked, and they didn't feel intimidated by it. Yeah. Yeah?
Yeah, so my question, when I was in Singapore, that's where I was when I had my daughter. So my doctor was actually practicing for high-risk pregnancies, and he worked with women in different parts around the world, as part of this research, Africa, many parts. And so one thing he shared was that, again, this back goes into the whole diversity aspect, is that even women's bodies around the world are not the same in terms of the pelvic floor design itself.
Yeah.
And so I was just curious.
Yeah.
What's interesting on diversity here in design?
So what is interesting here is that the pelvis there are only a few millimeters difference between different women, which you wouldn't think, but it's actually fat here on the outside. So my pelvis is probably the same size as yours, more or less, and everybody in the room. So that's not where the differences are. It's, as you say, in other parts of the Constitution. Here we are working very much with the local context, Sweden, and so we worked with somebody who's specialized in pelvic floor muscle training for women, with a particular movement practice called Feldenkrais. So, yes, we also work with other ways of coming close to the body. So Nadia, who's here with me today, has been working also with coming even closer, so touching your vaginal fluids, creating stretchable sensors with different designs that allow you to feel, women to feel what is going on down there. There is stuff going on. There is menstruation, and there is yeast, microbes. Anyway, so we've also gone that close to the body and looking for ways of extending your bodily awareness of your own vagina and working with that over time. I have. She's been working in VR environments with intercorporal design. So trying to figure out how you can feel that somebody else is in a VR environment in a real corporal sense of really feeling the other without necessarily using haptics. So the system here that I'll show again is really using visuals as a way of faking haptics in a way. And we've also, in fact, then moved on to working with companies. So we worked with Volvo. We used to be a Swedish company. I think it's now Chinese. I think I'll skip that. But what we did was we worked with interactive car seats. So, you know, for those autonomous driving cars you have, you're supposed to be allowed to fall asleep or have a coffee or whatever. But then at certain points, you might have to take over the driving again. So we worked with a somaesthetic design of the car seat and shape-changing elements in the car seat, not only to wake you up, but also to work with feeling the movements of the car moving and so on. So again, trying to prove that we can work with different kinds of somaesthetic experiences. And you know, driving is an aesthetic experience. It is really interesting to be part of a car, your body is bigger. I'm driving around this minibus right now and I feel so powerful. I have this minibus and all my minions in the back seat driving around, you know, so that's my body, and the aesthetics of that and the moving landscape and so on is fantastic. So designing with or for that is something we've done. I'll show you where we're taking stuff with IKEA. So here we're working with falling asleep. This is really noisy. I'll try to talk over it. So here you can see this thing is a shape-changing thing following a breathing pattern. And so that was one of the things that we designed together with a bunch of IKEA designers. So first we did a lot of bodily exercises to feel breathing and falling asleep, and we let them try our Soma mat and the breathing light and other systems. And then step by step they started designing with simple haptics. We call them Soma bits, very simple 1-bit interactions, and programmed with live programming, with pneumatics coming in and then sitting like, whoa, doing live programming, to get to lo-fi testing of ideas a little bit faster so that you can feel and experience ways of falling asleep. Yeah. So we used vibration, heat, shape-changing elements. Heat in particular is very interesting. It's a very intimate and lovely interaction modality. But there are also painful experiences in life, aren't there? And they're also formative and interesting. Not everything has to be pleasurable and falling asleep and meditating and working with your pelvic floor muscle. Stuff can also be tough. So we've had a lovely workshop where we participated on colliding with robots. And you're not supposed to collide with a robot, but it's fun. So we did. We first had a dancer take us through what it feels like to collide with something when it only touches your skin, when it touches the muscle, when it touches the bone. And then we started colliding and creating for aesthetic experiences of collision. Yeah. Lots of fun. So that is how we've been working with this bucket, and these were just some of the examples, probing the reach of the Soma Design program. So, and it worked. For these I showed you it worked. Obviously, I'm not showing you the ones where it failed. But we do actually go through and discuss when it fails and why it fails. But you might wonder then, what is it that works? How can you design? So it is really in how you do the design process. If you want to work in that feminist, pluralist, non-dualistic way of engaging, then you need to do it through your whole self, with your whole body in the room. So we had, for example, recently a workshop where we were 7 of us that wanted to spend a whole week exploring our pain and not pain that can be cured, again going back to the instrumental, but rather the pain that is chronic and you have to live with it. So my pain is to do with my hips after giving birth. Unfortunately, it's what it is. So I have to live with it. But what we wanted to do is to become sensitized to the experience of pain and start sort of touching it in ways that would lead us to doing design work beyond this idea of curing. So the first day, what we did was we had engagement with our breathing again. We did some contact improv, if you know what that is, when you touch and move with others. So we're leaning against one another's backs and trying to breathe together or, lift somebody else's leg or whatever. And then by landing in our bodies and with one another, because we didn't really know one another, everybody in this group, we started to be able to articulate this pain. So here's my pain, one of my pains. The second day, we did something that any researcher will find horrific. We went out into the forest without documenting and without talking. We went to this place in the forest where we could make a fire, and we had decided that right when we were walking towards this place, we would stop talking and we would just be there for hours and hours and hours. Now, why do you do that? Because if you remove language, you have to start noticing other aspects of how you are in that space. Perhaps noticing nature and what it influences you, or noticing the others and what they're doing, and so on. So this is a method by a professor called Barbara Formis. She calls it somaesthetics. She's a professor at Sorbonne. She's a philosopher. And so we were silent for hours without documenting. Yeah. It's liberating to do stuff where you're relying then on what meaning arose out of that and not taking video or photo or notes or whatever. And then on the Wednesday, we went out into the forest again, but now we started designing. So we brought yarn with us and started exploring ways of expressing stuff, perhaps expressing pain, perhaps expressing ways of overcoming fears or whatnot. So lots of yarn stuff, and also picking up whatever you find in the forest and using that as part of the design. And then on the 4th day, on the Thursday, we did again some body exercises, but then we also did the Soma bits, exploring a little bit of haptics. We were utterly disappointed with the haptics, because compared to the materials of the forest and the yarn, the haptics were really like, right? Yes. And so I think now we need to rework some of how this haptics works. And then finally, and at the end of that day, on the Thursday, we were all confused. We'd done all these different things, and we didn't know where we were heading or anything. So on the last day, we did some more body practices, but then we started expressing, and this is where language came back again. Expressing our experiences. So here I am with my experiences. And what I did was, what we did was we first expressed it, and then we interpreted one another's expression without the person who had done them expressing first. Yeah? That was because we'd been noticing one another throughout the week. And so once you see what they've written or what they've drawn, then you can start saying, well, this person, I think, actually has this kind of experience. That was really fabulous and interesting to me that we could do that. And so that's where we came to certain experiences that we then want to continue to work with and design for. But then it takes ages to do that, of course. It's not done like pop, pop. So what we're doing here, if you want to have some theory again, a little bit of theory, is we're shifting between first person, second person, and third person perspectives. So in a way, you're being inside of an experience in the forest, not thinking too much about what it is, but just feeling it unfold. And then you can step sort of outside of yourself and look at your own body and go like, oh, seeing it from the outside, but you also, of course, still feel it from the inside. Or looking at others as a way of understanding your own experience. And so this is what we're doing. We're trying to shift back and forth between these perspectives in our design processes. Yeah? You're still with me? So I'll just give you one example of when we did this with text. So this is my colleague. We were designing for trying to be a ballerina, balancing on a balance beam, and perhaps falling over. And as you see, our balance beam is basically a plank on the floor, so it wasn't that difficult. But anyway, so we were doing this thing, and then we were trying to say, okay, what can we do to sort of recognize or work with changing this into something that is an interesting experience? So first, you have your own experience of feeling balanced, and then we added a muscle sensor. You can see it on his cuff that generated sound. So as that muscle is tensing or releasing, it's like and so that externalizes an experience that is on the inside into sound so that he could hear it, but we could also hear it. So we could almost, at that point, sort of hear when he was about to fall, kinesthetically sort of empathizing with him. And he could go from being inside the experience of balancing to then looking at it from a third-person perspective. So this is what we're doing. We're going back and forth between these, putting our attention, our somaesthetic attention, to different parts of this process. What we're doing is, in a way, sort of dissolving or traversing these dichotomies between inside and outside, or individual or social, or body or technology, through attending to our inner universe, but also strategies for going back and forth. And as I have with me today, I just wanted to mention that we also work with not only with aesthetics as a bodily, felt, somatic experience, but also ethics as a bodily, somatic, felt experience. And so we call that felt ethics. And that sounds really wacky, and some of you perhaps feel like that is a bad idea. Because why would you rely on your body to guide you in ethical considerations? But of course, that's where it starts. Again, if you separate out the body from your emotion and from your rational reasoning, then you made a mistake. That's where ethics is. It is in how we act towards others. And so the way that Schusterman speaks about this, the philosopher that brought out that Soma Design, somaesthetics, is that, you know, we cannot separate ethics from what is really deeply embedded with us, ingrained with us, these ethical understandings of the world, our knowledge, our self-knowledge, right action, happiness, and justice. So in a way, the way I see ethics these days, after working with, is that it's something that arises right in between me and the system, in the dynamics between us, both during the design process, but also once something is designed. It's the dynamic interaction between us. That's where the aesthetics is, and that is where the ethics is. And that's what we're designing with. I'll end just by saying that to me, this Soma Design is some way of examining and improving on the connection between sensation, feeling, emotion, subjective understanding, and values, but also engaging with the digital materials or haptic materials or whatever materials you have in a very physical, bodily, somatic way to shape the two to come together into really interesting meaning making. Thank you. Yes.
Hi, thank you so much for the interesting. So I see kind of two themes with the feedback you get for, the things you're acting on or experiencing for the breathing. I have this augmented feedback of my breathing as it's happening, and then with the opera singer, we had people experiencing without actually acting, and I was struck by your description of how that felt for you. I'm curious if, say the singer had stopped singing and then she wore the vest, and then she got to experience the muscles contracting after the act of singing, just separating the actions and the experience. Do you think she got that? Oh, okay.
We're trying that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that is in that monster paper. And that's where, so we made a version of the corset before doing this one. We made a version of the corset where you could first record with sensors, breathing, your own breathing, and then it was played back to you with shape-shifting elements at those locations where it was organic and it was human-like, but still not. It was this monster experience. It felt like some kind, I don't know how to describe the experiences, and that is why I think somaesthetics is best practiced through actually feeling it and doing it. So the actual embodiments of our systems is where the knowledge is. But we tried to describe it in this paper, the monster paper at Tukay, to say that it's partly human, partly not human. It's eerie, it's displeasurable, it's also pleasurable at the same time.
And just to clarify, if the opera singer had worn that vest, but without acting, do you think they would have learned something new? Would it have felt monster-like, or would it have felt like themselves?
So opera singers are working really hard with becoming, this is their instrument, right? This whole thing is their instrument. And they work for years and years and years with training the muscles, training the instrument, perfecting the instrument. Her awareness of her own body is quite different from mine. So we had other people who tried out this performance who were singers themselves. They had a different understanding and a different experience than mine. They could talk about, oh, Kelsey is really strong, isn't she? So they would have an understanding of muscular movement that went beyond. Mine was more like, oh, this is becoming part of the piece. I'm feeling Morten Feldman's friends, and I'm feeling the quarrels they have, and I can feel this and I can feel that, right? And so they could also articulate that and decompose that into what is going on here with the muscles and so on. So I think for her, she also saw it as a potential training instrument to try and figure out how to work with some particular muscle or so. Yeah. Yeah.
I was really intrigued by how you were talking about like the desire in some ways to like draw out these like displeasurable feelings. So when you're describing like the drumming, and also in the chronic pain workshop, like, feeling the pain rather than trying to cure it. But I'm trying to like kind of place the motivation for it. The way I was interpreting it is kind of in the same way that like in art we desire art that brings out sometimes like displeasure of emotions like anger and sadness. Is that the right like way to interpret it? Like that, like it's broadening the experiences, or and is there like, is that the long and short of it, or is there like, or are you trying to like draw together and like make the pain or whatever pleasurable, or is it like the experience of the pain that's kind of meaningful?
When it's chronic pain,
It is.
Processes of acceptance, right, and processes of living with and so on. What is life? What is a good life? What is a good life with living with pain? What is a good life with going to the opera and seeing someone dying on stage with passion and whatnot for love? You know, why do we want to reduce this into these instrumental things? Like, oh yeah, but it strengthened my muscle over here. You know, who cares about strengthening your bloody muscle over here? It's about the whole range of experiences that we can have as humans. And if we then say, oh, let's move away from anything displeasurable, is that life? So I can say with the chronic pain, my first reaction after that week was, so I have always pain here, and now that I talk about it, I'm like, oh yes, today as well, there's pain, yeah. Most of the time I suppress it because it's yeah. If I tend to it, then it yeah. But being allowed to feel it, to engage with it, to try and articulate it, where is it, how is it moving, where is it today, what's going on, without the aim of changing it or anything, just articulating it. I came to more self-empathy, more of the like, stackars lilla du, poor little you. You're going around every day suppressing all of this pain. Or, you know, you need to be you need to love yourself and you need to embrace your pain sometimes, not all the time, but at times. And so that connection between thought, emotion, pain, back and forth, right? And ways of engaging with that. Also pain, even chronic pain, is not the same every day. So there's also that process of not curing it, but understanding and articulating and living with it. Yeah, it's not easy. I'm pretending now that, and then you figure it out. Like, no, it took me years to accept that no matter how much training I did and whatnot, it was not getting better. Yeah.
This might be completely unrelated, but I also want to know if it's like a subversion of what you're talking about here, or if how is, I think there's some technologies that are developed, and you see them on these like Instagram stories or TikToks where men washing dishes and then having pain as they're menstruating during it, right? Or sort of mimicking the experience of menstruation or other I think physical sensations. Do you think that supports bringing more people and more sort of understanding towards Soma design and somaesthetics, or do you think that that's just kind of like a subversion or a gimmick or something?
Some of it is a bit sensational, right? I'm interested in some of the longer term experiences, but why not? Why not? That I'm not going to look down on everyday pleasures of laying about on your sofa, eating ice cream and watching TikTok videos, and seeing somebody in pain from pretending to have menstruation. That is also interesting and pleasurable, and we can go into that. But I'm more keen on the going a little bit deeper than so, I would say. And there is a strong critical element. And so the feminist theories and some of the people that are with me, like Nadia, if you want to talk more about the critical perspectives, the non-normative, the approaching of taboos, the engaging with the non-habitual. So, culture imposes a lot of shit on us, right? So as women, for example, you can do, do you want to do a little man spread with me? Sit like a man. Take some space, my dear female friends. Yeah? So you don't dare to? Not doing that. Okay, because it's normatively, it's not okay for a woman to do this. After a while, most of us will feel like, no, but then people can see, no. There is nothing in our physical constitution that says that we have to sit like this or stand like that. No. This is a norm enacted on our bodies. And if you disrupt those habitual movements, as we do in our Soma design processes, we try to do something strange. You take something normative, like eating, chewing mainly on this side, to chewing on the other side. So you do the non-habitual, make it strange, in order to see what is there, what is enacted normatively on my body. and my subjective experience. Can I change that? Can I expand my universe? Can I take a little bit more space? Yeah.
One thing I have to enact normatively is unfortunately the end of our seminar.